Parte uno, room 66. I was hired to sit with a man who doesn't wake up. That was the job description. No exaggeration. Overnight patient monitor, it said. Private facility. No medical license required. Must be discreet. They didn't mention the patient had been in a coma for 28 years. Or that he hadn't aged. Not really. His name is Walter Ames, born 1954. Fell into a coma in 1995. Stayed that way. No recovery, no decline. Just still. Breathing. Heart beating. Skin unwrinkled. Like he'd been put in stasis. The nurses joked about it. Called him Sleeping Beauty. Said his wife used to visit every day until she passed in 2009. No one came after that. Until last month. That's when they hired me. The facility isn't a hospital. It's not even licensed anymore. More like a hospice that never got the memo. Outside of Portland, Oregon, in the woods. It used to be a long-term care wing, then a psychiatric annex. Now it's a half-abandoned shell with just 6 patients on the roster. And Walter? He has a whole floor to himself, the 6th. Technically condemned, but his family pays a lot to keep him there. A private trust, I was told. Still active, still funded. No one knows who keeps it going. They just deposit the money and look the other way, and hire people like me. My first shift started at 7 p.m. A nurse named Donna gave me a quick tour. "You'll be up here alone," she said. "Just me?" "Yep, the others are downstairs. This wing's yours." She handed me a key card and a flashlight. Lights flicker sometimes. Generator's old. I asked what I actually had to do. She shrugged. Just sit with him. Log any changes. If the monitors beep, page us. Otherwise, keep him company. She smiled, half-hearted. Maybe he'll finally open his eyes for someone. Room 1616 was at the end of a long linoleum hallway. The floors squeaked with every step. The walls were off-white, peeling in corners. Faint smell of antiseptic and old rain. I scanned my keycard. The door clicked. Inside, quiet. Dark. 1 bed, 1 chair, a heart monitor, an IV drip, a window showing nothing but black forest, and Walter. Thin, pale, unmoving. His chest rose and fell with a slow rhythm. A nasal cannula fed him oxygen. His hands were folded neatly on his stomach. His eyes were closed. But his expression, he didn't look peaceful. He looked like he is listening. I sat in the chair. Opened the logbook. First entry, 1995. Last night's note was written in the same neat handwriting as the rest. Vitals steady, no movement, eyes closed. 2:14 a.m. Possible vocalization, unclear. No response. I looked up. Vocalization. Donna hadn't mentioned that. I looked at Walter. He didn't move, didn't twitch, didn't breathe any differently. But I had the distinct feeling I was being watched. I told myself it was nerves. Pulled out my phone. No signal, of course. The hours passed slowly. I watched the monitor. Heart rate, 52 BPM. Oxygen, normal. Temp, normal. The man was stable. More stable than most people I know. But something about him unsettled me. He looked too intact. Not bloated, not atrophied. His skin didn't sag. His hair was still dark at the roots. His nails looked freshly trimmed. It didn't make sense. At midnight, I heard it. A whisper. Soft. Too soft. I stood, leaned closer. Walter's lips were moving. barely. No sound came out. Then his eyelids fluttered. Only for a second, but they moved. And I swear I saw his left hand twitch. I grabbed the logbook, wrote it down. 12:04 a.m., slight eyelid movement. Mouth possibly moving, no vocalization. Left hand twitch uncertain. I looked back. He was still again, frozen, as if nothing had happened. But now the heart monitor was slower. 48 BPM. I leaned in, whispered, "Can you hear me?" Nothing. I sat back, rubbed my eyes, told myself not to get spooked. At 2:14 a.m., it happened again, just like the log said. This time I heard the word. One word. Soft, grainy, cracked. I stood up so fast the chair fell over. The word echoed in my skull. Below. Was he dreaming? Was he aware? I checked his vitals again. Stable, heart rate 50. Breathing normal, mouth closed, but his lips were stained faint gray. Like ash. I went to the window. Nothing but pine trees and darkness. Turned back and froze. Walter's eyes were open, just a sliver, and he was smiling. To be continued in part 2. Parte 2. The room beneath. Walter's eyes were open. Not fully, just a thin slit, but enough to see the whites and the dark, unmoving pupils. He stared at me without blinking, and that smile, not wide, just the corners curled slightly upward, soft, wrong, like he was amused or mocking me. I froze for a full 10 seconds, then blinked, and his eyes were closed again. His mouth relaxed, back to how it was. The monitors never changed. No spike in vitals, no alert, just the steady rhythm, as if nothing had happened. But I knew what I'd seen. I grabbed the logbook, wrote fast. 2:16 a.m. Eyes briefly opened. Smile noted. Duration, 10 seconds. No verbalization. Monitor unchanged. Possible seizure reflex? I reread the entry. Didn't believe it myself. But I couldn't erase it. I didn't want to. Whatever this was, I needed to track it. For my own sanity, if nothing else. I sat back down. Didn't take my eyes off him for the rest of the night. No more movement, no more whispers, no more smiles, just silence. At 7 a.m., Donna arrived. She took one look at me and said, "Rough first night?" I nodded. She handed me coffee. Cheap, burned, glorious. Then she saw the log, raised an eyebrow. "Eyes open?" "Briefly," I said. "You sure?" I hesitated. "Pretty sure." She looked at Walter, then leaned in, opened one of his eyelids with her thumb. The eye didn't react, didn't flinch, didn't track, just stared straight ahead, still, lifeless. "Reflex," she said. "It happens." "But he smiled." Donna paused. "Walter's muscles twitch. It's normal." She didn't sound convinced. Or maybe I was just projecting. Either way, I didn't argue, just handed over the logbook and went home. I should have slept. I didn't. I spent hours reading old articles about coma patients. None of them described what I saw. None explained the whisper or the word below. I Googled the facility, found an old website, broken links, outdated formatting, a blurry floor plan. Something stood out. There were 6 floors listed, but one old page cached in the Wayback Machine showed 7. A sublevel, labeled -1 observation wing. No details, no photos, just the word sealed. I felt something tighten in my chest. I knew that's what he meant. When he whispered, below, he didn't mean hell. He didn't mean the afterlife. He meant downstairs. I returned the next night, brought a flashlight with fresh batteries, and my own notebook. I didn't trust theirs anymore. Walter was exactly where I left him. Still, eyes closed, mouth relaxed. Donna had left a note. Vitals normal, no movement during day. I checked the monitors, steady. I sat and waited. At 1:32 a.m., I heard a sound outside the room. Not footsteps, a mechanical sound. Metal scraping metal. I opened the door. The hallway was empty. But down the corridor, past the elevator, a door I hadn't noticed before, partially open, steel, unmarked. I walked toward it. The flashlight flickered. I reached the door. Inside, stairs, leading down. Concrete steps, unlit. The air smelled of dust and copper. And something else, something I couldn't name. I looked back down the hallway. No movement. I stepped inside, descended. 1 floor down, a heavy metal door blocked the path. Locked, but beside it, a keypad. Dead. No power. I ran my hand along the wall, found a light switch, flicked it, nothing. Then the flashlight caught something above the door, painted in red, observation level 1. And below that, scratched into the wall, do not open, do not wake, do not name. I stepped back, took a photo, then heard something behind me, a whisper, very soft. Closer. I turned. No one, just darkness, and my own breath. Too loud, too fast. I ran back up the stairs, back to Walter's room. He hadn't moved. Didn't look different, but his monitor now read 44 BPM, lower than before. I sat down, whispered, "What's below?" He didn't answer, but the monitor beeped. A slow, deliberate pulse. Then his mouth moved. Just barely. 1 word. Audible. Real. Her. To be continued in part 3. Parte 3. Her name wasn't in the records. I didn't sleep again. 3 nights in a row now. Each one heavier than the last. I couldn't get the word out of my head. Her. Whispered from the mouth of a man who hadn't spoken in 28 years. It wasn't just a fluke. It wasn't a twitch or seizure. I heard it, felt it in my bones. He was trying to tell me something. And the sealed floor below him, it had something to do with her, whoever she was. The next morning, I pulled Donna aside, asked her if there had ever been female patients on the 6th floor. She shook her head. Walter's always been the only one up there. What about downstairs? I asked. Downstairs? Below the 6th? Sublevel. She gave me a confused look. There is no sublevel. I found a staircase. Donna frowned. That wing was sealed in the 90s, before my time. Nobody uses it. Why? No one ever told me, just that it was closed after an incident. What kind of incident? She lowered her voice. Back when this place was state-run, they had psychiatric patients down there, experimental stuff, sleep labs. Closed it all after some kind of scandal. Lawsuits, missing records. I felt the hairs on my arms stand up. Missing records? She nodded. Wiped clean. Management said it never existed. That night, I brought bolt cutters and a crowbar and 2 flashlights. I told myself I wouldn't go down there. Not really. I'd just check the lock, take a look, confirm what I already suspected. But at 2 a.m., when Walter whispered again, "She waits," I knew I had to go. The stairwell was colder than before, the air thick, unmoving. I reached the metal door. The keypad still dead, but the bolt cutters worked. The lock snapped. I pulled the door open. It groaned like something waking up. The hallway beyond was lined with doors, all unmarked, each with a small square window, all blacked out with paint or paper. The walls were concrete. So were the floors. No signs, no numbers, no life. I walked slowly, flashlight flicking left to right. Then I saw it, the only door left ajar. Inside, a bed, a chair, and a table. On the wall, scrawled in something dark, "Do not say her name." I stepped inside. The air was colder here. And on the bed, a patient file, left open, name section torn out. But inside, medical notes, timestamps, heart rate logs, and one entry circled 3 times. 12/6/1995. Vocalization recorded. Subject repeated name, Walter, 47 times before flatline. My stomach dropped. Walter. I flipped the page. There was a photo. Blurry, black and white. A girl, maybe 20. Long dark hair. Eyes closed, strapped to the bed. Mouth open mid-scream. No name. Just a note. Subject 616B. I stepped back. 616. Walter's room. I looked at the wall again. The writing had changed. Now it said, "She's still here." Then the flashlight flickered, and I heard breathing behind me. I spun. The hallway was empty, but the light at the end had gone red. A low, pulsing alarm began to sound, dull, far away. I ran, back up the stairs, burst into Walter's room. He was still, eyes closed, monitor steady, but the window, it was fogged. On the inside, and in the condensation, someone had written, "I remember." To be continued in Part 4. Parte 4. Subject 616B. I didn't tell Donna what I'd found. Didn't tell the day nurse. Didn't even write it in the log. Not the sealed room, not the patient file, not the breathing, and especially not the words on the window. I remember. Because if Walter remembered, that meant he'd seen her. Whoever she was, subject 616B, tied to a bed directly below him, according to the old file. Someone who said his name 47 times before flatlining. Someone the records tried to erase, but they didn't finish the job. That night, I brought a voice recorder, set it beside his bed, pressed record at 11:58 p.m., sat back, watched him, listened. At 12:13 a.m., the whisper came again, faint. I leaned in. Not alone. Then silence. The recorder caught it. Clear. I played it back 5 times. The voice was his, but layered, as if someone else had said the words with him. A woman. Soft. Wavering. I uploaded the audio to my laptop, isolated the frequencies, ran it through a spectrogram. There it was, 2 overlapping waveforms, both speaking at once. I ran it again, this time backward. The female voice said, "Don't let him open the door." What door? The one I already opened? The one below? Or something worse? At 3:17 a.m., the lights in the hallway went out. All of them. The emergency lights didn't kick in. The flashlight I had, dead. Phone, black screen. Then the window in Walter's room shattered inward. Not cracked, shattered. Glass flew across the floor, but no wind, no air, just stillness. And then footsteps, soft, approaching, from the hallway. Then the door opened, but no one stood there, only darkness, and a sound I will never forget. Breathing, right next to my ear. But no one was there. I turned to Walter. His eyes were open again, wide, fully this time, and his mouth moved. "You let her in." He began to convulse. The monitor spiked. BPM, 124, then 137. I hit the call button. No response. I tried to hold him down. His body arched. His hands clenched the sheets. And then he screamed. One word, not whispered. Screamed. "Eloise!" The lights flicked back on. Donna burst through the door 30 seconds later. But it was over. Walter was still. Eyes closed. Vitals dropping back to baseline. She checked the monitor, checked him, checked me. "What happened?" I couldn't speak. I just pointed to the shattered window, to the voice recorder still glowing red, to the logbook, to everything. She looked at me like I'd broken. Maybe I had, but I knew one thing now. Her name was Eloise, and she was no longer below. She was here. To be continued in Part 5. Parte 5. Eloise moves. They didn't believe me. Of course they didn't. Donna filed a report about the broken window and claimed it was due to temperature stress. The overnight director said the power failure was routine generator malfunction. The recordings I made, they vanished from the drive the next morning. But I knew what I heard. Eloise, her name, screamed through Walter's withered throat, like a memory clawing its way out. And now she was here. Not below anymore, not forgotten, awake. They moved Walter the next day. Not to a hospital, not even to another room. They took him off the 6th floor entirely. I wasn't told where. When I arrived for my shift, the elevator to the 6th was locked down. Red tape across the doorway. A sign, closed for maintenance, no access permitted. I asked Donna. She just said, "He's safe now, and so are you." Then handed me a new assignment, another floor, another patient. But I refused. I wasn't done. That night, I returned, alone, through the back fire exit. Keycard disabled? Sure, but I had copied the code weeks ago. I knew the layout, and I knew where Walter would be if they tried to hide him. Sublevel -1. I brought bolt cutters again, a camera, and a bag of salt. Don't ask me why. Some instinct, protection, or maybe just theater. The halls were darker this time. The lights flickered less. They didn't flicker at all. They were off. Dead. Not burned out, just unplugged from something bigger. But the air wasn't still. It breathed. With me, against me, through me, like the building had become lungs, and I was inside them. Room 3. The one where I found Eloise's file. It was open now, lights on, soft, white, like a hospital ad. And Walter? He was there, sitting up, not strapped, not monitored, just sitting, staring at nothing. His eyes tracked me as I entered. No monitor beeped. No vitals hummed. No nurses. No guards. Just him. And her. Eloise. She stood in the corner, back to me. Dark hair. Same hospital gown as the photo. Bare feet. Arms crossed behind her back like she was hiding something. I froze. Walter spoke first. You shouldn't have brought her name back. I tried to answer. Nothing came out. He looked at her. You promised to sleep. She turned, smiling, but the skin of her face didn't move with the smile, just the lips. It looked printed, wrong. You promised to forget, she said, but Liam remembered. My knees went weak. How do you know my name? I managed. She giggled, then whispered. You've always been here. She stepped forward. The air got colder. The lights dimmed. Walter tried to stand. Collapsed. She ignored him, walked toward me, and said, Now it's your turn. I threw the salt, a ring around me. It landed with a hiss. She stopped, smile gone. She tilted her head. That only works in stories. I replied, So does she. Then everything shattered. Lights exploded. Glass flew. Walter screamed. Not a word, just loss. A primal howl of someone who loved something once and never again. And Eloise, she was gone. I woke up in the parking lot, bleeding from the forehead, bag torn open, camera smashed. No sign of Walter, no sign of her. Just a note pinned to my chest. In old yellowed tape. One word. Below. To be continued in part 6. Parte 6. I didn't go back for 3 days. Not out of fear. Out of confusion. Nothing made sense anymore. Not the records. Not the whispers. Not even time. Each night since that encounter, I'd wake up at 3:14 a.m. Not from a dream, from a voice. A whisper in my ear. Liam. Sometimes male, sometimes female. Always familiar. And always followed by silence, so thick I could hear my own heartbeat. I checked the hospital's public documents. There was no mention of Walter Ames, no death notice, no transfer. It was like he never existed. Same for Eloise. The only proof I had was the bruises on my arms, the cuts on my cheek, and the words still taped to my wall. So I went back, one last time. The facility was empty, vacant. Chairs stacked in the lobby, reception phones unplugged, the walls stripped of signage, like it had been abandoned overnight. But I knew better. This place never closed. It just folded into itself, became a memory no one could prove. I walked the halls alone, back to the elevator, still out of order. So I took the stairs, past the 6th floor, down to the basement, then deeper, down the service stairwell to level -1. The hallway lights were dim, buzzing faintly. Every door open now, except one, room 0, the end of the hall. No label, no lock, just a handle. I turned it. Inside, darkness, no furniture, no bed, just Walter, standing, facing the wall. He turned slowly. His eyes were blank, mouth stitched shut with thread. But he nodded, stepped aside, revealing something behind him. A hole, not a trapdoor, a pit, round, perfect, black. At its edge, Eloise, kneeling, drawing on the floor with a piece of charcoal. Circles, endless spirals, not looking up, not acknowledging us, just repeating her shapes, over and over. Then she stopped and whispered, "Welcome back, Liam." I wanted to speak, ask what this was, what I was, but I couldn't move, couldn't blink. Walter touched my shoulder, and I remembered everything. I was here once, years ago, a child, a patient, room 0. They brought me in for observation. Said I had visions, said I spoke in languages no one taught me, said I drew names I couldn't have known. One of those names was Eloise, one was Walter, and one was mine, written over and over in a spiral pattern until the page tore. Just like hers, just like his. This wasn't a hospital, it was a vault for stories that couldn't be forgotten, that weren't allowed to die. The staff didn't treat us. They trapped us, looped us, and every so often someone would wake up, someone like me. Someone who remembered too much. But by then it was always too late, because the moment you remember, you're already back. Eloise looked up, eyes black, no pupils. She smiled. Now it's your turn to draw. To be continued in part 7. Parte 7, the memory that wrote me. I don't remember kneeling, or taking the charcoal, or drawing that first spiral. But I did. My hand moved on its own, circles within circles, tight, precise. The floor beneath me grew warm. The air shimmered. Walter stood behind me, silent, watching. Eloise didn't draw anymore. She just stared. And I felt it, the shift. Something unlocking. Like a story finally admitting it had no ending. The spirals weren't just symbols. They were maps. Loops of memory, perfectly preserved. Each circle pulled at something inside me. Not just thoughts, not just visions, but entire versions of myself. Sitting in the same chair, watching Walter, walking the same halls, opening the same doors, but choosing different moments. Each version forgot something. Each version remembered something else. And all of them drew. The room around me faded. The walls peeled away like paper, burned at the edges. And in their place, mirrors, dozens, hundreds, each showing a different me. One was older, one was a child. One was strapped to a hospital bed. One was in room 616, watching Walter sleep. Each one looked up at me. Each one whispered, "Choose the version that ends it." I dropped the charcoal. The spiral stopped. The hole in the center of the room pulsed once, like a heartbeat. And Eloise stood. She was taller now. Or I was smaller. The room didn't have a floor anymore, just reflections, floating beneath us, like memories drowned in glass. She held out her hand, palm up. In it, a key. Old, brass, stamped with the number 616. "One door left," she said. I didn't take it. "What happens if I open it?" I asked. "You wake up. And if I don't?" She smiled. "You stay with me." I looked at Walter. He nodded. One last time, then turned and stepped into the spiral, vanishing. Eloise didn't flinch. She simply whispered, "He was the dream. You were the dreamer. But you forgot, and now the dream is drawing itself." The walls began to collapse. Not violently, like paper being folded. The mirrors broke, each one shattering inward, each reflection smiling as it vanished. And I finally understood. I wasn't watching a patient. I was watching myself, over and over, from every angle, waiting to remember what I already knew. That I never left, that I never got the job, that I never applied. Because I had always been here, below, drawing. Eloise stepped backward into the void, and I followed, not out of fear, but relief. Because this time, the spiral didn't loop. It opened, to be concluded in Part 8. Parte ocho, wake point. The spiral didn't end. It opened. Not down, not up, just out, like unfolding a memory too long held shut. I expected darkness, but instead, light. A clean room, white walls, a bed, a chair, the desk. And on that desk, a sketchbook. Mine. Pink cover, faded corners. I sat down, opened it. Every page I'd drawn was there. The spirals, Walter, Eloise. The window with "I remember" scrawled into condensation. The stairwell door, the hole, the mirrors. And at the very back, one final page, blank, waiting. I picked up the pencil. It felt warm, familiar. I started to draw. Not a spiral this time. A door. Room 616. The first moment. The only moment. Because maybe this wasn't a story. Maybe this was a recursion engine. A machine designed to trap narratives inside themselves. Each character thinking they're the one watching when really they're the watched. Each character thinking they're on the outside until they realize they never left the inside. The door on the page opened. I heard it. Not in the room, in the sketchbook. Footsteps approaching, soft-soled shoes on old linoleum. I turned the page, and I saw myself walking down the hall, clipboard in hand. First day on the job, meeting Donna, meeting Walter. The loop was closing, unless I did one thing, one final change. I wrote across the bottom of the drawing, "Do not enter." Then I tore the page out, burned it with a lighter that wasn't there moments before. The smoke curled upward, and the walls began to peel again. Not in decay, but like skin being shed. I stood, faced the mirror across the room, expected to see myself, but saw nothing. The reflection was gone, and that meant it worked. I opened the door. This time it wasn't room 616. It wasn't sub-level point 1. It wasn't even the hospital. It was a sidewalk. Morning, birds, a man walking a dog. He didn't see me. No one did, because I wasn't me anymore. I was a story that ended, and endings don't walk among the living, but sometimes they're remembered. Back in the facility, Donna opened a file marked Liam Marlowe. No records, no ID, just a note in someone else's handwriting. He stayed below, let him draw. She closed the file, turned out the lights, and walked away. Somewhere in a locked basement, a hand picks up charcoal, begins to draw, one circle, then another, then another. Not to trap, not to haunt, but to remember. Because memory is the only way out. And someone always has to hold the pen. End of story. ... Include end of story.